Hello everyone and welcome to round 2 of the FTX Crypto Cup, where we have a very nice treat. It is Magnus Carlsen versus Ian Nepomniachtchi, so the world champion versus world chess championship challenger. They will face each other for the title of world champion in November in Dubai, but for now we have this very nice rapid game from the FTX Crypto Cup. Magnus has the white pieces. So let's see how the game went. It gets pretty crazy right out of the opening. So Magnus with the white pieces opens with e4. Nepo goes for the Sicilian defense. We have knight to c3. Magnus going for maybe a close Sicilian setup. And e6. We have knight to f3 and now knight to c6. And he does strike in the center with d4. We have captures, and then now queen to c7. We have bishop to e3, Magnus just continues development, and now a6, taking away the b5 square from Magnus's knights here. We have bishop to e2, and now b5. So this has all been played before, nothing out of the ordinary here. We have captures on c6, queen captures, and now e5, preparing bishop to f3, as you know that black also wants to fianchetto his bishop. And you're never really worried about anything like queen captures on g2, because bishop to f3 both defends the rook and attacks black's rook here, so that'd just be losing for black. So instead, after e5, we have bishop to b7, bishop to f3, countering this queen-bishop battery, and now queen c7. Magnus trades on b7, we have captures, and queen d3. You could castle right away, but Magnus goes queen to d3. He says, I might be castling queenside, but I also might be castling kingside in the future, so we'll see what happens. And known moves here are f5 and bishop to b4. However, here we have knight to e7 by Nepo, and it is already, as of move 12, that we have a completely new game, and Magnus starts to play very, very interestingly from this point on. He plays bishop to c5. Now he says, okay, once you move the knight, I can always capture the bishop and you lose castling privileges, but you are more than welcome to grab my pawn on g2. And there's nothing wrong with capturing the pawn, but it's questionable what do you get, because if you don't gain anything and you maybe lose a little bit of time and your position isn't all that active, and it's not, I mean, the knight will stay here, the bishop cannot be developed, the rook's really not doing all that much, maybe you don't want to grab it. But Nepo, he doesn't care, he grabs it either way. He plays bishop captures on g2, and he says, okay, prove to me that this is not working for me. So Magnus just castles queenside. He adds another piece into the game, which is the rook on d1. Now the rooks are connected. And here, queen back to c6. So Nepo grabbing a pawn, Nepo now retreating with the queen. And now, can he survive this position? Well, Magnus says, nope, no you can't. He plays knight to e4. He defends his bishop on c5, and also he has ideas of bringing this knight over to d6. And if that happens, that's just game over. So you have to make some room for the king, or you have to be ready to eliminate the knight with something like bishop captures on d6. So here we have knight to f5. Now both the knight and the bishop are defending the d6 square. So here bishop captures on f8, rook captures on f8, and now just rook h to e1. So nicely centralizing the rooks. You can't really kick away the knight from here. You don't have the g-pawn or the e-pawn to maybe try and get an outpost for your knight on d6. But that's what Nepo was going for. So here we have rook to c8. You have to be a little bit careful here. If the queen moves, then queen captures, and c2 will be checkmate. So Magnus first goes king to b1, and now f6. Nepo goes after this very strong e5 pawn, and here Magnus just defends it. You could, however, capture, and it could be very interesting, but it's a rapid game. You don't have all the time in the world to calculate, but I will show it because it's just super fun. For example, g captures, now knight to c5, and I'll look at all of these squares and pawns that are attacked. It's just crazy. For example, rook to f7, you add another defender, we still capture, just queen capture, knight captures on e6, d captures, and queen captures on f5. Now you cannot capture because the e-pawn is pinned, and also you still defend against checkmate as the queen is covering the c2 square. So here white would just be better. The black king is still in the middle of the board, and it's very unlikely you'll be able to hold this in a rapid game. But who knows? So instead, after f6, Magnus just solidifies with f4. We have f captures on e5, f captures, and now h6 by Nepo, taking away the g5 square as well from the knight on e4, and now rook to g1, just putting a rook on the semi-open g file, and maybe you could throw in moves like rook to g6 and so on. So here Nepo plays queen to d5, and this is just a really interesting move because it doesn't work. That's putting it plainly. It doesn't work for a very specific reason, so feel free to pause the video and try to find this specific reason while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on finding this, I want to say obvious move, but obviously it's not that obvious. So for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's knight to d6 with check. This is what Nepo missed, and this is what Magnus played almost instantly. The problem is if the knight is captured, then you have this queen g6 check, and now you just lose a queen. The knight will block, of course. We have captures, and that's it. e6, and black's entire position just falls apart. For example, we could capture here with check, king d8. We're going to grab the other pawn as well. King c7, something like rook here, and that's it. This is unplayable. So instead, after knight to d6, Nepo said, all right, I can't go for that. I have to play king to e7, and I have to give up an exchange here. There's nothing to be done. So Magnus grabs it with check, rook captures, and now and only now Magnus very happily trades queen. So queen captures, pawn captures, and he grabs a pawn while he's at it. So rook captures on d5. We have king to e6, pushing the rook back, and rook to d3. And now the situation here is both players have 5 pawns. However, Magnus is up the exchange, and Nepo will most likely win the e5 pawn. So here, this is a liability, so you want to get rid of it. So g5, and you're basically hoping to somehow get those pawns up the board with maybe some h4, h5, g4, h4, and maybe in the future you can create a pass pawn here since you do have a 2-to-1 advantage on the king side. So Magnus goes a4. He wants to create some weaknesses on the queen side and start pushing his soon-to-be passed pawns. We have b captures on a4, and now rook to g4. Magnus goes after these weak pawns now. We have rook to c6, and he just grabs the a4 pawn. We have h5, and now rook d to a3. We have g4. Nepo just continues pushing his pawns, and now is the moment where you have to act. So feel free to pause the video once again and just think about the position. What do you play here? So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on playing the move that you immediately thought of first. Or yeah, okay, I know some of you thought about b4 first, which is also fine, but there is a more forcing move, and that is, of course, rook captures on a6. And this is just, the question is whether you can capture this pawn and survive black's pawn pushing on the king side, and you can. For example, a fun line that shows how it's possible. We're going to capture this pawn here, and now white will push b4. We have h4, black will continue pushing on the king side. Now we're going to play b5, that's the point. g3, now if you capture the rook here, we're just going to push the pawn all the way, or even capture on h2. So here we're going to capture once, captures, and now white has this rook captures on g3, and this is how white prevails. If this is captured, then you can capture here, and well, that's just it. You could go for some rook to c5 action, go after this pawn, but then we defend with rook to b3, and the game continues, but it is definitely the way to go. However, Magnus played king to c1. He thought he couldn't capture the pawn, and now Nepo just gains a very valuable tempo. So here, king captures on e5, now rook captures on a6, and now h4. So here comes rook captures on c6, d captures, and now king to d1. So Magnus needs to get his king closer to those pawns there. We have h3, and now king to e2. We have g3 by Nepo. He played this instantly as soon as Magnus played king to e2, and now Magnus just played king to f3. Of course, you cannot capture the pawn because there's this very, very hideous idea that after h2, you're going to defend the queening square, yes, with rook to a1, but we still just bring a queen into the game. And now after rook captures, we're going to capture here with check. King has to move, and now, or maybe even here, and now after knight captures, we're gonna then attack the knight. We're gonna win the knight, but it's basically just a long draw. We're gonna get here with the king, we're gonna bring our king up the board, and the king will grab the pawn, and that's it. So this was possible, but Magnus avoids it. He plays king to f3. Of course, he wants to win this game. And now g captures on h2. We have rook to a1. Now, of course, you have to guard the queening square. Now comes knight d4 check. Now the c2 pawn falls. King g3. Knight captures on c2. And then now rook to c1. We have knight to b4 now, defending the pawn here. Now king captures on h2. We have king to d4. We have b3 now, taking away the b5 the b4 square from the king, but also just preparing rook to c4 to win the knight here. So Nepo, of course, has to be careful. He plays c5. He defends the knight, and now king captures on h3. And now it is very unlikely that Magnus will be able to do anything here. Because it's simply a drawn end game. So knight to c6 was played. We have rook to c4, king to d5, and now king to g2. We have knight to e5 attacking the rook, rook to c1, and now Nepo just plays c4, and here Magnus just traded the pawn. We have captures, 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 and captures, and it was in this position that the players drew the game by insufficient material. So yeah, really a nice one. I counted this as a +1 for Nepo as their prelude to the World Chess Championship match, because Nepo blundered terribly here in the opening after he played this move, after this queen to d5 idea. He gave Magnus all that Magnus needed, but Magnus still wasn't able to win. So I think this will bother Magnus, and even though Nepo might be a little bit mad that he blundered the position like this, still he blundered against the world champion and then drew the game, seemingly without all that much trouble. So very interesting to see how this evolves, but like I said, I counted this as a +1 for Nepo as we go towards their World Chess Championship match in November in Dubai. So yeah, once again, hope you guys enjoyed it. Keep using hashtag suggestion and suggest games for me to show, because there are too many of them for me to follow all of them. I would like to thank Samit Amin, Ryan Urban, Akram the Pilot, William Rideout, and Emilio Carraro for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the FTX Crypto Cup, checking up on your wonderful suggestions, and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.